Hello and welcome to my mess of a channel. My name is Tay and I'm on a mission to get cancelled by the entire K-pop community. The topic of today's video actually stemmed from a conversation I had on Twitter with a friend of mine a long time ago, in which we both came to a conclusion about the true reason K-pop fans become so riled up at the idea of non-Asian idols joining the K-pop industry. And it's a conclusion that I feel like many people likely have reached, especially with all the recent uproar about NCT Hollywood. But since it's the unpopular opinion, also known as the truth, nobody wants to say it out loud, so here I am. I want to preface this by stating that I am not Korean, or even Asian at all. I'm American and my views on this all come from my American mindset, but given the fact that most K-pop fans aren't Korean either, especially the loudest fans, I suppose my views hold just as much weight as theirs do. So if me not being Korean or Asian is a factor in why you think my opinion is invalid, take a look at who else's opinions you're listening to first. With that being said, let's jump into the actual discussion. So basically, the general consensus amongst the Western K-pop community is that white people should not debut as K-pop artists. The typical argument is that white people have the privilege of being accepted in and leading the biggest music market in the world, America, and therefore should not invade a space created by Asian people as a place where they could thrive based on their own standards and culture. At the surface level, this argument is reasonable. If POC create a safe space for themselves, there's no reason for white people to leave their own space and step into another space. I mean, we see how white Americans pushed their way into African American music in the 20th century and completely took over every genre we had going for ourselves until we created rap, and now they've decided to colonize that too. So yes, I understand the worry that white people would do the same thing for Korean music, but as we've seen so far, Korea don't care about the whites. K-pop stans love bringing up that white idols would take opportunities away from Asians in Korea, or that they'd get privileges that Korean idols won't get. Yes, the argument is that Korea, a country pop fans paint as homogeneous and xenophobic and ignorant and uncaring of other countries or cultures, whenever a culturally insensitive scandal happens, would then turn around and favor foreign white people above its own citizens. The even more bizarre part of this excuse is, I remember Vernon from 17 publicly saying he faced bullying as a child for being half white. If being white were a sought after privilege in Korea, wouldn't people who are half white be put on a higher pedestal rather than be targeted? Make it make sense. But one could still make the argument that there's privilege there that comes from the novelty of being white or half white in Korea. I mean, Somi allegedly won Produce 101, didn't she? Why would Korea vote a half-white idol as the center of IOI above the 100 other fully Korean girls they could have chosen instead? That's a prime example of white privilege at work in Korea, isn't it? To which I say not really. At the end of the day, Somi is still a charismatic idol with a lot of personality and charm and visuals that appeal to the Korean beauty standards. So I do not believe her being half-white played a factor in her winning, because if that's what Korea cared about, Alexa would have been a member of IZ*ONE, or at least have gotten close to making the final lineup, since clearly her company wasn't involved in the voting scandal. Lol. Yes, for those of you unaware, there is another female K-pop idol who is half white, and unlike Somi, she's not a household name for K-pop stans. But shouldn't she be? Shouldn't her half-white blood at least given her a leg up against her contemporaries? If we're rolling with the idea that white people will have it easier and be privileged in K-pop, Alexa should be known as the best dancer in the 4th generation by now. Or even taking it a step further, gag groups like EXP Edition and Kachi, or solo idols like Lana, who is coincidentally the only one I can give an actual idol title to since she trained in the K-pop system, performs like she's taking everything seriously, and seems to have an actual love and appreciation for the country and its culture, should be at the forefront of emerging K-pop acts, shouldn't they? Or if we want to bring it back to 140, Chad Future should have become the top idol in Korea. But where is he? Many new K-pop stans don't even know who Chad Future is, which further proves the point. If being a white K-pop idol were the privilege K-pop stans have said it is, there'd be an influx of successful white idols by now. But there hasn't been, and I don't think any K-pop fans truly think white people are going to overtake this space that Koreans have built for themselves and steal awards and fans and streams from their favorite groups. But we've got one more point to dive deep into before we get to what the real issue is. We can't talk about gatekeeping in K-pop without mentioning how K-pop fans can't face the idea that the industry isn't a fantasy world bubble that's completely detached from the rest of the world and its cultures. Fans see K-pop as an entire different world, and I'll admit, coming from a Western mindset and being exposed to the idol system and K-pop in general does feel like entering a new world at first. Celebrities in Korea don't act the way Western celebrities do because Korea doesn't have the same obsession with celebrity culture as America does. Their scandals are much more mild. They don't swear. They don't date publicly. They aren't always in the tabloids. Things are much more hidden, and therefore it feels like bad or controversial things are happening in their lives, and K-pop is a colorful paradise with great music and questionable fashion choices. But seeing Korea as something quote unquote other, something borderline alien, is why any interaction between the East and West is seen as weird or unexpected. This is why Lil Uzi Vert being a G-Friend stan is much more bizarre than someone like Zico being a G-Friend stan. This is why it's still odd to see K-pop groups doing interviews with BuzzFeed and 17 magazine, even though it's becoming more of the norm. This is why when you hear a K-pop song playing in an H&M store, you feel a jolt of confusion. This is why you'd feel more comfortable telling your friends I like a boy group called BTS versus telling your friends I like a Korean boy group called BTS. We could spend all day going into the racist and xenophobic implications behind wanting to drop the Korean part of an artist's identity just to avoid scrutiny or backlash from Westerners, but that's a topic for another day. The point is, we, as K-pop fans, are not used to Korean culture crossing over with Western culture because Korea is physically far away, because the West generally doesn't care about Korean culture, because Korea is homogeneous and anything exported from their country is strictly Korean, save for a handful of idols who are not Korean but are still creating Korean art. All of these factors blended together is what keeps Korea in a bubble from our Western perspective, and when anything happens that threatens to pop that bubble, we don't know how to react with rationale and logic. In essence, not wanting non-Asians in general but typically white people to enter the K-pop industry isn't about dismantling privilege and protecting a space Asian people created for themselves. It's about Western stans being able to keep their ideal image of a perfect Asian idol to be consumed for their own fetishistic purposes. Side note. The only reason black idols or Latinx idols wouldn't face the same backlash for joining the K-pop industry is because Western fans would have to deal with being called racists for this opinion, and by merely focusing on the white idols who are trying to enter the Korean market, these stans believe they can absolve themselves from any accusations of racism that could become part of the conversation. But back to the fetishism. By letting non-Asians into the K-pop world, there's no way for these fans to envision these idols as the ideal standard of what an Asian man or woman must be like. If K-pop is supposed to be filled with the epitome of physical perfection for these foreign, alien, quote other Asian people, but then we turn around and add non-Asian, specifically white people that we see every day to the industry, then we have effectively destroyed half of the standard. Quote attractive and exotic Asian people turning into quote attractive common people of other races easily leaves room to destroy the other half of the standard attractiveness, which for a visual-based industry like K-pop, and the fetish-based view Western stans bring to these parasocial relationships, would cause K-pop fans to step back and confront how much importance they actually place on visuals versus how much they place on talent and personality. A view Western K-pop stans have always sat on a high horse about how they don't care about looks, they care about the music and the idols as people. I know many of you don't want to hear it, but armies are the poster children for Western K-pop stans, meaning we can take their views and ideals about BTS and apply them to how Western stans view K-pop at large. So when armies preach about how BTS isn't a typical K-pop group because the other groups are shallow and BTS makes real music and other groups only care about their looks and coming off as perfect idols, but BTS cares about the art and being themselves instead of industry robots, the widespread version of that mindset is that Western stans don't care about how pretty or handsome an idol is, or their outfits or their hair and makeup. That's surface level stuff that only non-Westerners care about. We see the idols for who they really are. We see artists and dancers and musicians, not cute boys providing fan service above music. But if anyone were to challenge armies and say yes you do care about visuals, look at you collecting those Namjoon photocards, It would force armies to confront that they do care about the visual aspect of BTS to a degree. And to expand on that, if we show Western stands that they fetishize Asian people and are primarily consumers of visuals, we would probably melt their brains. Deep down, these fans know this is true, but rather than have to admit that they are the same as the very people they try to put down for enjoying what they enjoy, they'd rather pretend the problem lies elsewhere. It's not that they can't handle their fetishism bubble being popped. That bubble doesn't exist. The real problem is white people. The real problem is colonization. The real problem is these Koreans don't want white people in their space, and it's up to non-Korean people to speak up for them, or else white people are going to ruin K-pop and hurt Koreans. If you're still with me after that tangent, congratulations, but we're about to go further off the deep end. Just so you know, buckle up. The trope of the sexy, exotic, foreign Asian person is harmful and disgusting for reasons I don't think I need to explain, but the fact that most Western K-pop fans don't realize they have this problem because they think fetishizing Asian people is only writing cringy Wattpad fan fiction about Jimin Oppa and Lisa Unni is a major reason why this conversation has never happened when it needed to happen years ago. When you say I hate men but my K-pop boys are alright, or when an idol is compared to a Western musician in a positive way, i.e. he's the Justin Bieber of Korea, when the comparison is simply about how each is a household name, and you're still mad because my faves are much better, you're not doing anything but putting these idols on a higher pedestal for the simple fact that they're Asian idols. For example, Ariana Grande could say I've written 50 songs in my whole life and K-pop stans would flood her with LOL, and Bang Chan wrote 50 this year alone, and Calm Down Siso KG Dragon wrote Big Bang's entire discography. But if you were to say I've written 50 songs in my whole life, nobody would say a damn thing. As K-pop stans, we have this incessant need to put K-pop and Asian idols in general above all other types of artists. And this doesn't just show in the way we praise and defend their music and image, but also the way we hyperfixate on their race, no matter the context, necessity, or appropriateness level. Example, whenever a group comes to promote in America, we know they're going to experience racism and xenophobia. That's our slogan. It's written right on the Statue of Liberty. And while it's important to acknowledge and call out when these things happen, making the group's entire promotional period about the racism they're facing or about Asian representation in America is just another form of how we care above looks, and therefore race, above art. Let's take Super M for example. Every time they do promotions in America, we get the same argument. They just want to be like BTS, versus if BTS paved the way for Asian representation in America, then why do you not want more Asians represented in America? And then falling into, well, BTS had to go through so much racism and xenophobia to get to where they are, versus Super M is going through it too, and why do you want everyone to suffer like BTS did? That's really weird, my dude. This continues to the point where any discussions to bring new fans into Super M who may not be K-pop fans in the first place. Any conversations about, yeah, the one with the pink hair is Baekhyun and he's the best vocalist of his generation, go listen to his solo album, or the lil gay one is Taemin, he's basically Korea's Michael Jackson, here's a fan cam, or anything else. That could be opening conversations about the members' music or artistry itself, or even something as simple as explaining what the hell Super M actually is and what NCT is. Get totally derailed by the hyperfixation on race and weaponizing it, especially for petty fan wars. Western stans care more about arguing over race and representation and racial trauma that isn't even their own than they do about actually doing anything that could help fight the racism they claim to be so concerned with by building up the art. These idols are enduring said racism to spread into this foreign market. Western stans care more about weaponizing race and coddling grown adults than they do actually helping promote and spread the art these idols are creating, which in turn makes the supposed constant racist and xenophobic encounters not even worth it in the end if these groups don't see the results they need. And with that we circle back to Western K-pop stans being far more obsessed with looks, with what is visible, than what is within the idols. It's the way we think we protect and shield these idols from the world because they're unable to do it for themselves by speaking for them, defending them against any and all criticism, and acting like they are innocent baby daffodils who need big strong Westerners to come in and defend their honor against the people we've decided are their enemies. It's the way we've made ourselves the loudest voice about who should be allowed in the K-pop industry, inviting our voices into a space where they're not needed. but then turn around and hate white idols for what we decided is them inviting their voices into a space where they're not needed. But we excuse our overstepping with we just want what's best for the Asian idols and don't want to see white people ruin K-pop like they ruin everything. However, the lack of self-awareness from Western stands does more harm to the industry than racial integration ever will. The way we fetishize and worship these idols is not healthy for us or the idols themselves. All it does is breed a more toxic environment for fans and idols alike. And if we continue to ignore our own role in how the industry is shifting into something of an ugly fusion between Korean traditionalism and Western celebrity worship culture with the fetishistic cherry on top, it's only a matter of time before it blows up in all our faces. If you stuck with me through all of that, I actually applaud you. If you followed along and understood what I was saying through all of that, I bow down to you because I know I can chase rabbits all day long. If you got a little lost along the way, the Spark Notes version is this: if you are not Korean, you do not get a say in who is allowed in the Korean music industry. Korea is in charge of what Korea wants to do with Korean music, Korean entertainment, and Korean culture. Just because your perfect foreign Asian fantasy bubble was not built to withstand other races and types of people joining in doesn't mean you get to gatekeep an industry and culture that were never yours to begin with, and the superiority complex, mixed with colonizer vibes you'll be giving off, just makes you come off as hypocritical when you try to argue your reasons for gatekeeping. That's all for my video today. I hope you guys hated it and are on your way to burn my house down at this very moment. See you soon, if I survive long enough to make another video. XOXO Gossip Girl.